am here in studio with author Maureen Boyle, a name that you probably know, especially if you follow news here on the South Shore. She's been doing it well for over 3 decades. And I like to say you and I are both, we've both been in this game, this business a long time. And we're the last women standing, it seems like sometimes.
It does seem like that sometimes.
No, I remember meeting you years ago when you were a newspaper reporter. You're also a published author. And now you are in charge of the journalism program at Stonehill College. Just so people know all your great credentials. She's an award-winning journalist, Maureen Boyle, the author of 3 true crime books, Shallow Graves, The Hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer. That was published back in 2017, and we're going to talk a little bit about that because that's an ongoing investigation, and people are interested in this. You wrote The Ghost, The Murder of Police Chief Greg Adams, and The Hunt for His Killer. That was published in 2021. And Child Last Seen, The Search for Patty Desmond, published in June of 2023. And now you're working on another book.
Yes, I am.
Okay, we'll let us know when you've got that out. Now, Maureen Boyle has been named New England Journalist of the Year 3 times. She's been honored for her work covering crime, drug issues, and human interest stories, both regionally and nationally. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism and a master's degree in criminal justice. And Maureen is now the journalism program director at Stonehill College right here in Easton, Mass. So you really know what you do and you got the good credentials. I wanted to talk with you again about Shallow Graves, The Hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer. This is a story, this happened this started percolating in 1988, around that time?
In 1988.
Okay.
In 1988, 11 women went missing, roughly between March of 88 and September of 88.
Okay.
There's a hard end to it that we know of.
So it was 11. Did they find all their bodies?
Now, they found nine women, and 2 were still missing.
And what did they have in common?
All of the women were addicted to drugs. That is really the main.
The nexus of it?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, people have tried to link all of them to prostitution. Mm-hmm. And, while there are a couple of the women who have criminal records for prostitution, not all of them do. So the link is drug addiction.
Okay, and they were all found, was it within a certain area or off a certain highway?
All of the women were found off of the highways that surround New Bedford, which is interesting because we associate the case with New Bedford, but none of the women were found in New Bedford. So the New Bedford police were not the primary investigators of the case because none of the bodies were found in New Bedford. They were found in Freetown, they were found in Dartmouth, they were found in Westport, and one was found in Marion.
How long did it take the state police to get involved?
Well, the state police are always the primary investigators in all unattended deaths. So when the first body was found in July of 1988, that was a July 4th weekend, that body was found in Freetown. It was found by a woman who had stopped along the highway to use the facilities.
Okay.
Although there were no facilities, So she pulls over and she walks into the brush and finds the body. And that was in Freetown. Freetown police were called, and state police also responded. That was the first body. The woman had no identification. The body was decomposed. The medical examiner had told police that they believed that the body had been there from before the start of winter, which really threw investigators off because the woman had gone missing in March. So when they were looking at missing persons reports, they were looking during the wrong time period. And also during that time, not all missing persons reports were in the database.
Right. Now, as a reporter, did you get a tip about this right away? Do you remember the first time you heard about any of these incidents?
Well, during that period of time, I was a general assignment reporter covering politics of all things. Okay. Prior to that, I was the primary police reporter. So the weekend reporter had covered this murder immediately. It was by the time the second body was found, which was a couple of weeks later. The second body was found on 195 westbound in Dartmouth by 2 men on motorcycles who pulled over to use the facilities, walked into the brush, and found a badly decomposed body. investigators at the time thought the body had been there for quite some time, not realizing the body had only been there for 2 weeks.
So this has gone on for decades. This story has made national news. There's a lot of people that talk about it, but this is your story. You've covered this more thoroughly, intensely, and for a longer period of time, and not only written newspaper articles, but of course your book about it. Did this story speak to you in a certain way? Because you've covered a lot of big stories.
Oh, it did, because prior to this, I had done a number of stories on heroin addiction and how it affected women. I did a number of stories on prostitution in New Bedford, and really highlighting and going in depth with the women who are on the street and looking at their stories and why they were there. They were there because of their addiction, not because it was a quote-unquote job. So I was familiar with the women that were on the streets. I had interviewed them a number of times over the years. And I had, as well as doing stories about attacks on women that were addicted.
Now, again, it still surprises me that there has been no arrest in this, or definitive, but there were 2 main suspects. Want to talk a little bit about them?
Yeah. There were two of the main suspects that came out publicly. Kenneth Pont, who is a New Bedford attorney, who in his younger years had been addicted to heroin, had recovered, went to law school. He was, sort of the poster child for recovery. And a young man named Anthony DeGrazia. He lived in Freetown. He had been arrested years earlier for charges of raping 2 girls that he picked up hitchhiking. He was eventually acquitted on those charges. Those were the 2 that came out publicly. Kenny Pont was the only person ever indicted in the case. He was indicted for one of the murders, but not all of them. And when the district attorney at the time, Ron Pina, lost the election, a special prosecutor reviewed the case again, and those charges were eventually dropped for insufficient evidence.
Do you think that there is a possibility that there was more than one killer? Or do they really believe that it's one?
The DA at the time would say 1 or more.
Okay.
But I suspect it was just 1.
Okay.
Because if it was 2, someone would know.
Yes, which amazes me. This is, again, they were all local victims. And you think with something where it's a relatively close community, are you surprised that it hasn't been solved, and having the fact that it is very local to the New Bedford area, do you find that helpful or a hindrance?
I think it's a little bit of both. I'm really shocked that it hasn't been solved. 30 plus years later, and particularly because New Bedford at that time is a very closed community. I know in the 1980s, one person from Boston described New Bedford as the end of the universe in the state. That didn't go over well in New Bedford. But people were it is a very tight-knit community. Large families, largely Catholic. People know everyone or know someone who knows someone who knows someone. Lives are interwoven in New Bedford and the surrounding towns. So I'm very, very surprised that someone hasn't come forward and said, this is who the killer is, or I saw this.
As I remember, too, there were 2 investigators that were really dogged about this. I believe they're both retired now.
Yes. And
that with the cold case unit, though, in the Bristol DA's office still pursuing this?
Yes, they are. The 2 main state police investigators, Josie Gonzalez and Mary Ann Dill, they were the main investigators for the state police. But there was other members on the state police unit that were also working on the case, as well as local detectives from the surrounding departments. So it wasn't that they were doing it alone,
right.
And they'll be the first to say that. And now that they've been retired, they've sort of handed it over to other investigators, and the Bristol County DA's office does have a cold case unit with state troopers in it, and they have been working on the case. We're not going to hear about it because they're very, they don't go public with everything
Sure.
that they have. So, but they have looked at different possible suspects or
Okay.
different scenarios. Over the years, there has been a number of different types of testing that has been done on evidence. They don't discuss whether or not there is DNA. That's one question that always comes up. Is there DNA? Back in the 80s, as we know, but some of your listeners may not know, DNA testing was very, very different than what it is today. Back then, you needed large samples.
And as I remember, it really didn't come into the courts here till what, late 80s, early 90s.
Yes.
And people just assume, oh, it's going to be this, and this, and even the evolution of DNA. I know we talked a little bit off air about touch DNA now. They're getting so good with figuring out, okay, this other person was in the crime scene of the room, and they were here 2 weeks before this one. So it's gotten so spectacular. But do you think people are so used to now to watching all the crime shows, they think, oh yeah, modern forensics, this will be, this will be solved before the commercial. Maybe not.
Well, if this had happened today, it would have been solved already for a variety of reasons. Cell phones, location devices on your cell phone, smartwatches, surveillance video, and touch DNA and other improvements in forensic science.
Have you been in touch with any of the families of the victims over the years?
Yeah.
Are you still in touch with them?
Yes, with some of them.
And do you believe this will be solved in our lifetime?
I hope so. I hope so. Because there's been, I really do, so many parents of the victims have passed not knowing what happened to their daughters. In particular, two of the women who are still missing, Christina Montero and Marilyn Cardozo Roberts. The two of them, their parents died before they could even be found. And I know with Marilyn's mother, she really hoped that she would be able to bury her daughter and have a place to mourn. But there was nothing because she's never been found. She's out there someplace.
Wow. Do you still get tips about this case?
Yes, I still get calls or emails from people about who they think the killer is, some information that they may or may not have. Sometimes it's very, very general. Sometimes it's very specific. But it's not so specific that, yes, I saw this person with this victim and then I never saw them again.
Right.
Or I saw them kill the person. There is nothing like that.
Right. I know that you do pass that information on to
Yes.
that cold case unit. What about other people in the community? Again, we're talking with Maureen Boyle, the author of Shallow Graves, The Hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer. What about if they think, well, I remember that and maybe I never said XYZ? What do you tell them to do?
I tell them to tell me the information or call the state police. Now, a lot of times people, when they do call, they get very frustrated because they expect the police to call them back to let them know what they found.
Right.
And that is just not going to happen. That doesn't mean that they ignored what you told them. It just means that they can't tell you what they found.
Okay. Maureen, is there anything else I haven't asked you about that you think our listeners should know about this ongoing investigation, the hunt for the New Bedford Highway Serial Killer?
I want people to remember that all 11 women, they had problems with drugs. That's a given. But they deserved a chance to get clean. They deserved a chance to spend more time with their families. They deserved a chance to make amends. They deserved a chance to see their children grow up because 10 of the 11 women were mothers. They deserved a chance to live. Just because they had a problem then does not mean that they could not have overcome it. But someone took away their chance to live, and the chance of their families to see them succeed.
Well, we salute you for keeping their memory alive, and I know sometimes with this goes hand in hand a lot of times with investigation with the law enforcement, keeping their story alive. Something may spark a memory. Again, if people have any information, to call the Bristol County District Attorney's Office. Maureen, we appreciate you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.